Okay, hi, I'm Lucy. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate in economics at Cornell. My talk project topic is connecting with reality using mini-case study approach to facilitate and access student learning. So at first, what is the mini-case? So I define mini-case as a short case study on a timely topic that's related to the course content. It can be a half-an-hour podcast or 10 minutes video or 10 minutes reading of news articles on a recent event. This is quite different from a traditional case study that usually requires like 10 hours preparation before class, a lot of homework before, and a lot of material that written for the specific company or on some topics 10 years or 5 years ago. Next slide, please. So my talk questions are, can we use mini-case studies to increase students' excitement in participation? And how do students perform in mini-case-based exam questions? And what are some strategies to implement and access mini-case studies? I'll focus on number 2 in this presentation and happy to talk about 1 and 3 more later. A little bit context, I'm an economics student, and economics education has been traditionally and has been like forever chalk and board and very math intensive, but this doesn't work very well for business and policy oriented students that want to know how to apply those abstract ideas to real world content. So in this class, that's an economics class, but it's focused on application in law and economics in corporations. There are 55 students total, mostly upper level undergraduate and some master's graduate. About 80% US students and 20% international. There are quite some homeworks, 3 exams, some guest lecture, and there are iClicker questions in each class. So I collaborate with the instructor to design exam questions. I do the grading, and I also do a guest instruction. Next slide, please. So I try to use both qualitative and quantitative materials to enhance my analysis of the questions I want to ask. So I use observations, working log, dialogue, and talk to students to understand what they really think about this homework, how can we improve, and what are the challenges we face. On the quantitative side, I analyze student homework and exam questions to on those mini-case-based questions compared to those questions on the same topics of similar difficulty, but a non-case-based. And I grade those textual questions using Bloom's taxonomy. So in addition, because it's challenging to incorporate a lot of recent events to the homework and exam questions, I try to utilize students' feedback into the question-making process so the question quality can be improved over time as well. Next slide, please. So here's the main results from analyzing their final exam question. Let's look at the top panel, please. Those are the true or false or uncertain questions on some classroom concepts. For example, the mini-case-based true or false questions are related to the snapshot IPO and some corporate-related concepts in shareholder value or principal agency problems. And the non-case most comparable true or false uncertain questions are looking at exact the same concept but use more traditional abstract theory-based questions. As you can see, there's an option to skip a question or not. As we can see, there are 16 people skipped the mini-case-based true or false question, and 18 students skipped the comparable non-case question. It seems that students are more willing to answer a true or false uncertain question that relates to application in real world, but conditional on answering questions, students actually do slightly worse than the most comparable theoretical questions. So to some degree, this is because students are excited about this question, but to answer it and articulate the point clearly requires a lot of practice. So it's sort of interesting in my perspective that we can decompose students' thinking process analyzing their questions without too much guidance on those more flexible questions. And when we look at the bottom panel, is a little bit more interesting. The same idea when we look at the multiple choice questions, It's still true that students are more likely to choose to answer those mini case-based multiple choice questions, and they did much better in those mini case questions compared to the most comparable non-case questions. So this gives me an idea that, or my reflection on this is that students do better in multiple choice mini case questions because they get the intuition right, and they have a little bit difficulty in articulate the logic, which is reflected in the true or false question. And this project result is also consistent with my observation in their classroom performance. Students are always more active in answering questions, classroom discussions related to recent events, especially when it's controversial. They are less active when it's more abstract or theory-based. But when they get too excited about the questions, they sometimes get digressed and they don't want to talk too much about economics, but think about some other stories about that. So that can be something to work on. Next slide, please. So overall, I think students really enjoy mini-case topics on ongoing timely events, especially when they have the chance to become knowledge producers instead of consumers. So for example, in the Snapchat IPO case that we discussed in class, the first question that the instructor and I try to ask from students is, what is the company doing? Because I think that the instructor and me are both a little bit old to use that small technology, and students are more excited and familiar with those type of things. And so they're excited that they can produce value to the class and teach their peers. And it's very important to choose the mini cases that are recent but also closely related to the class content. There are a lot of things going on, but we cannot get too distracted. And there are a lot of challenges to get some students, some shy students, to get engaged. So we use a lot of code call or flipped classroom to get student-oriented, let them to be more creative and more engaged, and also use videos or iClicker questions to get everyone going. So it will be more interesting if in the future there are more data can be linked together. So instead of analyzing the de-identified test data, we can also link that with students' characteristics to understand the underlying mechanism why this case study approach works better for someone compared to others, and how can we understand this in terms of diversity and inclusion. Next slide, please. I thank Dr. Kim Willems and Colleen McLean for their guidance and encouragement to me throughout the process, my classmates in the TAR class and participation in the TAR conference, and the Teaching Center and CERTO at Cornell and IRB. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Lucy. Once again, if people would either raise their hand or write on the whiteboard, that would be great. Let me just start first. Just a quick comment, Lucy. Trust me, you are not too old to be using Snapchat or to know about Snapchat. That may not be the case for me, but it's certainly the case for you. So how many different mini case studies were there during the semester?
So we try to have one mini case every 1 or 2 weeks.
Okay. And so I was just wondering if you thought that it took a little while for students to get familiar with sort of the expectations for these mini case studies. I'm assuming there are not too many other courses in their curriculum that are doing this.
Students do have, so there's some interesting evolution in students' reactions toward those methods. They try to also mix different cases to make sure students not get overwhelmed. So for example, there are about 2 or 3 cases we try to track over the semester, but there are also some small one-shot games that we talk a little bit, and we try to make it very clear to students that those longer cases are something we're going to test more in the final exam, but we also want to make sure that you can try to generalize some methods that you learn from that. So for example, we focus on, for example, some fiduciary duty that relates to some new implementation of the Trump administration and the Snapchat IPO and something else, because those stuff are evolving over time and there are a lot of uncertainty. So even though we introduced them early in the semester, but we try to reiterate later on, there's some new cases that students contributed by sending us emails and share with classmates. And they try to spend relatively less time on that to get less distracted.
Great, thank you. So our timer's gone off, but if you could just, in just a few seconds, say how much time you spent preparing the case studies and maybe how you selected them, we could knock out the 2 questions that are on the board. Okay,
then I try to integrate them. So in terms of case study topic selection, it's actually based on the class progress. So we'll first look at the class content better. Like this week, we'll talk about principal agency, research over the news, whether there's anything interesting going on, and whether the class time is on track, and then decide whether to include that mini cases. And in general, we don't spend that much time in preparing, but we spend more time in preparing but there's a lot of more flexibility or preparation needed to improvise in answering or handling students' questions in class. So because it's mini, it's very small, and we don't write specific materials, so the preparation is actually less challenging than expected, but the grading is more challenging.